Hi everybody, and thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Up in the Air. I'm Quinn Leese.
And I'm Christy Stewart.
We have a jam-packed episode in store for today.
Yep, we have stories on pumpkins, flooding, ocean viruses, and much more.
We will also have a feature on lake effect snow.
That's right, and Mike will be joining us at the climate wall later with details on what weather we can expect next week.
We'll have all that and more, but here is Update in the Air. A powerful Pacific Northwest storm fueled by a remnant of a typhoon blew through parts of Oregon, far northwest California, and western Washington with damaging winds on October 15th, but was far less destructive than feared earlier. Part of what made this storm a concern was its origins from the remnants of what was once a western Pacific typhoon, Sangda. Winds gusted as high as 102 miles per hour, which were measured at Mary's Peak in central coastal ranges of Oregon, and gusts over 60 miles spread northward to the Washington coast. Portland International Airport reported a gust of 53 miles per hour, and Manzanita, Oregon recorded a gust of 64 miles per hour, just 2 days after a rare EF2 tornado which tore through the town. The National Weather Service in Seattle mentioned the track of Saturday's storm lines up with a high wind impact event in western Washington, potentially bringing the area its most significant windstorm in almost 10 years. Power was knocked out to at least 25,000 customers in Oregon, and there was still one rock slide reported in Tillamook County during the first Pacific storm. The National Weather Service in Portland, Oregon is even calling this the Ides of October storm, a nod to the infamous Ides of March in Roman history.
Almost 2 weeks ago, North Carolina was hit by Hurricane Matthew, and parts of the state are still submerged in water. Flash flooding killed 26 people along with 1.9 million chickens and turkeys. Over 2,300 people were rescued. Over 3,000 people are still in shelters. And over $1.5 billion in damages occurred to 100,000 buildings and homes. That figure does not include the many roadways that need repairing. A section of Interstate 95 is closed until the beginning of November, and a chunk of Interstate 40 was washed away and is expected to take several months to repair. Record-setting flood heights were reached. The Neuse River reached to 29.74 feet, breaking the previous record of 28.85 feet set in 1999 by Hurricane Floyd. Many residents are still without power in areas where waters reached above the power lines. Some crops that are supposed to be harvested now are still underwater and may be completely lost. Majority of the deaths reported were from people trying to drive on flooded roadways. That is why it is important to always turn around and don't drown when you come across a flooded road. Fortunately, North Carolina has been experiencing dry conditions since the hurricane, and the floodwaters are continuing to recede. However, if North Carolina sees any heavy rainfall in the upcoming few weeks, devastation could strike once again.
An international research team has tripled the number of known types of viruses living in the waters worldwide, which they say could help scientists understand the role of viruses played in nature and how they can voice their effects to curb greenhouse gases. The study, published in Nature on September 21st, was conducted by an international team of scientists led by Ohio State University from samples collected from the world's oceans from scientists. As oceans soak up carbon, oceans become more acidic, which put some ocean dwellers, including shellfish, at risk. The scientists say understanding how microbes and viruses interact is critical to any possible management effects. Scientists around the world are revealing how microbes impact our bodies, soil, the air, and the oceans. As we improve our ability to study viruses, we're seeing the role of viruses play in the microbial functions. For instance, microbes in the ocean make half of the oxygen that humans breathe, which makes viruses that infect these microbes partially important. In the end, the ocean is a major buffer against climate change.
If you've already been pumpkin picking this year, you might have noticed the pumpkins are smaller. Our drought in the Northeast this summer has caused crops to suffer. Above average temperatures led to an increase in crop-eating bugs and a decrease in necessary pollinating bees, causing farmers to work even harder to keep their crops alive. The lack of crucial rainfall during pumpkin planting season, late spring and early summer, produced smaller than normal products. Farmers tried to avoid a total crop loss by planting a certain amount of acres at different times throughout the planting season. According to State College's Wason Farms owner, This method worked pretty well, and the perfect pumpkin is out there. You just have to search for it. If you haven't found your perfect pumpkin yet, don't fret. The best time to pick pumpkins is now, the second and third weeks of October.
Congress recently set aside $500 million last month in emergency aid for victims of recent flooding. Louisiana crippled by a historic deluge in August. This came on October 13th when the federal government announced the Pelican State would receive more than 87% of that $500 million. Under that plan, Louisiana would get $437 million for victims with severely damaged homes and with little to no flood insurance. The bulk of this grant is likely to be spent on the flood's epicenter in Ascension, Eastern Baton Rouge, and Livingston parishes. Texas will receive $45 million to rebuild after massive floods near Houston and early this year. West Virginia will receive $17 million for severe flooding in June. To decide where to spend this money, HUD studied 33 federally declared disasters that hit the United States in 2016, before September, the day President Barack Obama signed off on that budget bill. The time frame prevents any of the $500 million going to states struck by Hurricane Matthew last week. HUD located those areas in the greatest need of housing repairs, basing its own calculus and numbers on the number of flooded homes and victims without financial needs.
Calling all coffee lovers, you might need to find a new indulgence within the next few decades. With rising temperatures and altering rain patterns from climate change, coffee production around the world might decrease by 50% in 30 years. Coffee plants thrive in stable environments where diseases and pests can't reach them. Climate change has already led to a spread of the fungus coffee leaf rust to Colombia's mountainous region, once too cold for the fungus. Coffee berry borer is also being drawn to the new, hotter and wetter areas of Tanzania, Uganda, and Indonesia. Warming temperatures can cause coffee diseases to spread like wildfire. From 1960 to 2006, Ethiopia's average annual temperature rose by 34 degrees Fahrenheit. And since the mid-1990s, Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras's average annual temperature rose by 33 degrees Fahrenheit with a 15% decrease in annual rainfall. Such temperature changes can alter a coffee's yield, flavor, and smell. Some wild coffees are even on the verge of extinction. Experts are currently developing a gene bank to preserve genetic diversity and are creating a variety catalog with information on different coffee beans' pest resistance, yield, and ability to thrive at certain altitudes. In the meantime, you can buy coffee brands that are carbon neutral to guarantee fair return to smallholder farmers and help build their capacity to adapt to climate change.
Thanks for tuning back in.
We now have a special feature on lake effect snow.
For centuries, settlers of the eastern edges of the Great Lakes have grown accustomed to living in areas of high snow, but never really understood why they got so much snow.
What these settlers didn't know was that they were in a geological area called a snow belt, which are plagued by a very special atmospheric phenomenon, lake effect snow.
Lake effect snow is a type of snow squall that only forms downhill of large bodies of fresh water.
Lake effect snow forms when a cold air mass passes over warmer lake waters. The Great Lakes rarely 100% freeze. If the winds and temperatures are right, the air acts like a big sponge that sops off all the water from the lake and wrings it out over the land.
All that water picked up from the lake usually travels no further than approximately 25 miles away before falling to the ground, but sometimes it can fly as far as 100 miles away.
Lake effect snow generally happens during the months of November through February. In February is when the lakes freeze over the most. When water is about 13 degrees warmer than the surrounding air, this is the key ingredient for a lake effect snow recipe.
Now, PhD student Daniel Epper will talk to us about why it's important for this 13-degree difference.
Yeah, that's often considered a good variable to look at. Usually the difference between the water surface and the temperature at 850 millibars is supposed to be at least 13 degrees Celsius. And that comes back to the dry adiabatic lapse rate. If you're 13 degrees colder at 850 millibars, it means you have a pretty much dry adiabatic lapse rate. And so you already have a source of instability as soon as you start heating the air.
Lake effect snow is a unique type of snow. How much will fall and where it falls depends on really the direction of the wind. Lake effect snow can hover in a certain area for hours, dropping several feet of snow.
Snowfall rates can reach up to 5 inches per hour. In 2001, Buffalo, New York was covered in nearly 7 feet of snow in a 48-hour period. People who live in lake effect snow-prone areas can handle themselves well when it comes to preparedness.
Now, Daniel Epper will discuss why the length is significantly longer than a usual snowstorm.
So, lake effect snow is pretty unique from other synoptic events in that other synoptic events have a lot of moving parts and the whole cyclone may be moving along. And once a cyclone moves out of the region, you expect your weather to clear up. But actually, lake effect snow often happens after a cyclone passes and after there's been a cold front. You continue to generate instability and to generate lake effect snow.
Interestingly enough, when it's warm enough out in the spring and fall, there can actually be lake effect rain as well.
And even ocean effect snow can happen when a similar pattern is in place near the sea. This happens a lot in the Cape Cod area.
Well, we hope you learn exciting new things about lake effect snow during our feature. Thanks for joining us.
For Up in the Air, I'm Casey Herman.
And I'm Drew Narsutis.
Back to the show.
Are you enjoying this last blast of summer, Christy?
I sure am. I hope these temperatures stick around for a while.
I hope so too. Now we have Mike joining us at the Climate Wall. Mike, are you enjoying these warm temperatures too?
I am, Quinn. It's pretty exciting to have the last week of summer-like temperatures to hit us now. We call that back home an Indian summer, where it's 1 week of just randomly summer-like temperatures, and then we get back to the fall. And speaking of the fall, we actually have our foliage color report for number 13 as of October 17th. And we actually have a lot of peak colors to be exact. Most of Maine is actually already at its peak. A little bit is actually past its peak. But most of the upper New England states, New Vermont, New Hampshire, the Adirondacks, and New York, are pretty much all of them are at their peak colors, which is pretty cool. And we have moderate color here in central Pennsylvania. However, we're starting to get some of these high colors starting to creep down as we get further on into the fall. And we also have our leaf trough report as well. Same date, October 17th. Both of it is actually, most of Pennsylvania hasn't had a whole lot of leaves dropped yet, but we're also starting to slowly creep down as the temperatures get colder, and as we start to hit close to the freezing point, that's when the trees really start to want to drop their leaves. But speaking of close to the winter, we have our first current snow depth monitor. We actually have a fair amount of snow out here in the Grand Tetons of Wyoming. And then a little smidgens here and there in the Cascades and also in the Sierra Nevadas of California. But that also brings us into our next week's air pattern as well, because we actually have a large trough a large ridge that gives us these warmer temperatures that's going to actually give way to a pretty strong trough as we hit into October 27th. With a pretty large ridge behind it that's going to give a lot of warmer temperatures up in the western United States, which as we get into October 27th and beyond, then we're really going to start to cool down as a lot of cooler air from Canada starts to being blown south. But with our temperature outlook for the 25th to the 31st of October, most of the central United States is actually going to be pretty warm actually. Down in Texas and the lower Mississippi Valley is actually going to be a fair amount above normal than what we expect at this time of year. And as we get further north, it gets a little bit less likely that we're going to see warm temperatures, but still it's going to be pretty warm that we expect. Up here in New England, Maine, and also Vermont, New Hampshire, upstate New York, and the rest of the New England states, it's going to be a little bit cooler than what we expect for this week of the 25th to 31st of October. And also in the western United States, in California, Nevada, north and southern California, we're going to see a little bit cooler temperatures than what they're usually used to. But in addition, we have our precipitation outlook for the same week, the 25th to 31st of October, both the peninsula of Florida and also along the Atlantic coast from Georgia to Virginia looks to be a little bit drier than they normally see this time of year. And in addition to being cooler, upper New England is going to be a little bit drier as well. But we also, most of the country actually, from California almost all the way over to Michigan, and actually beyond Michigan over almost central Ohio actually, looks to be a little bit more wet than we usually see this time of October. And also up in Northern California and also in most of Nevada, Utah, and some of the Four Corners states, going to be actually a pretty good likelihood that we're going to have a little bit more precipitation than they're normally used to this time of year, which is actually pretty good to see because a lot of the West their climates are much drier, but they've also been dealing with severe droughts as well, especially in California and Nevada as well. But that's important to see that they're going to get some rain. It really helps out the drought numbers as well. But in addition to droughts, a lot of northern Georgia and around here into the southern Appalachian Mountains, they've been dealing with some pretty severe droughts as well. But again, in Pennsylvania, we have been dealing with some storybook drought as well. But with some of the rain we've got, it's actually helped out in terms of getting rid of some of the drought numbers. But again, most of New England has been dealing with drought as well. But that's all we have. That's all the time I have at the climate wall. I'll send it back to Christy and Quinn at the desk.
Thanks, Mike.
And that's all we have for this week's episode. As always, thanks for joining us.
We'll be back next week with more exciting stories. But for now, I'm Christy Stewart.
And I'm Quinn Lease. We'll see you next week up in the air.